Welcome back, everyone, to the 21st Century Man podcast. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into Chapter 16.
Reversing Early Dementia. Quite a title.
It is. And, we hear about dementia more and more these days. It's a topic that I think is on a lot of people's minds.
Absolutely. And there's often this feeling of inevitability, like it's just a natural part of aging.
Yeah,
But this chapter, it challenges that assumption.
it really does. It starts with this quote from Pink Floyd, "There's someone in my head, but it's not me," which I think really captures that feeling of losing yourself, which is just, terrifying.
It is. And the author, Nancy Fantz, she's a medical writer, she does a great job presenting this really complex topic in a way that's both informative and, I think, hopeful.
Yeah, hopeful is a good word for it. Because the chapter kind of starts by asking this question. Why is it that some guys, some men, they're in their 70s, 80s, even older, and they're still sharp as a tack, but then others?
Yeah, they start to experience that decline.
Right. So what's the difference?
Well, that's what we're going to explore in this deep dive. And the chapter makes it clear. There's no single answer. It's not like there's one magic bullet.
Right. But it builds on what we talked about in the last chapter about general health and circulation. And then it goes even further.
It dives into some really cutting-edge stuff, some things that are honestly pretty exciting.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the solutions, I want to touch on something that kind of surprised me. The chapter talks about how men, maybe more so than women, might be vulnerable to these brain issues.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And the chapter suggests it could have something to do with genetics, specifically our chromosomes.
Okay, so remind me, what's the difference between male and female chromosomes?
Women have two X chromosomes, while men have one X and one Y.
Right, right.
Now, here's the thing. With two X chromosomes, women have a kind of backup system. If one X chromosome gets damaged, for example, by radiation or chemicals, the other one can often compensate.
Oh, I see, like a spare tire.
Exactly. But men with just one X chromosome, they don't have that luxury. If their X chromosome gets damaged, well, that's it. There's no backup.
So that could make men more susceptible to certain problems.
Potentially, yes.
Hmm.
And the chapter brings up this CDC study from
Yeah.
2011 that found boys were twice as likely as girls to have some kind of developmental disability.
Wow, that's significant.
It is. And it kind of sets the stage for this idea that maybe men are, from a biological standpoint, a little more vulnerable when it comes to brain health.
Which is a bit sobering when you consider that statistic the chapter mentions. Over 10% of men 70 and older have some form of dementia.
Yeah, that's a big number. And it's why this research into reversing dementia is so important.
Absolutely. And that leads us to Dr. Dale Bredesen, who the chapter really focuses on. He's been studying this for over 30 years.
He has. And he's not just some random guy. He's got serious credentials. He's affiliated with UCLA, UCSF, UC San Diego, and he's the president and co-founder of the Buck Research Institute on Aging.
So he's the real deal.
Oh, yeah. And what he's found is pretty amazing. He's basically saying that we can understand cognitive decline in a new way.
Not just slowing it down, but reversing it.
Exactly. And he's got some really interesting results from a clinical trial he did. 84% of patients in this trial actually improved.
84%, that's huge.
It is. And only 12% declined and 4% stayed the same. So that's a pretty dramatic shift from the traditional view of dementia as this inevitable decline.
Okay, so what's the secret sauce? How does he do it?
Well, he's got this thing called the Bredesen Protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it starts by identifying the root cause of the cognitive impairment. And he's broken it down into 6 different types.
6 types. Okay, tell me more.
So the first one is called inflammatory. And it's basically what it sounds like, chronic inflammation in the body. And the chapter explains that this is often linked to a gene called APOE4. If you have 1 or 2 copies of this gene, you're more likely to experience inflammation.
And I'm guessing our modern lifestyles don't exactly help with that inflammation.
You got it. Processed foods, lack of exercise, stress, all that stuff contributes to inflammation.
And that inflammation, it actually leads to the buildup of amyloid in the brain. That's one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's, right?
Exactly. So it's not just that inflammation is bad for you in general. It's directly linked to this specific disease process.
Got it. Okay, what's the next type?
The next one is called sweet, or type 1.5. And this one has to do with high insulin and high blood sugar.
So like diabetes.
It's related, yeah. But it's more specific than that. It's about this process called glycation, which basically means that sugar molecules are sticking to proteins in your brain cells and making them stiff.
So it's like they're getting gummed up.
Exactly. And that can lead to inflammation. And also, it disrupts those communication networks in the brain, the synapses.
Right, because if the cells can't communicate properly, that's going to cause problems.
Big problems. And with type 1.5, you have high insulin, but it's not working effectively. It's like your cells are resistant to it.
That's insulin resistance. I've heard of that.
Right, so you've got all this sugar in your blood, but your cells can't use it properly, and that wreaks havoc on the brain.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the third type?
The third one is called cold or type 2. And this is all about low levels of nutrients and hormones.
So, like, if you're not getting enough vitamins and minerals.
Yeah, things like vitamin D are really important for brain health. And the chapter also mentions hormones. Low hormone levels can be a factor too.
And I'm guessing this is where that whole idea of 500 trillion synaptic connections comes in.
It does. The brain is incredibly complex, and it needs a lot of fuel to function properly. If it's not getting the nutrients it needs, those connections can start to break down.
Right. And then difficulty forming new memories can be a sign that something's off.
Exactly. So moving on to type 3, we have toxic. And this one's all about exposure to, well, toxins.
Like what?
Things like mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, mold, toxins, you name it. Basically anything that can damage the brain.
That's scary.
It is. And the chapter talks about how these toxins can affect both short-term and long-term memory.
So it's not just forgetting where you put your keys, it's forgetting things that happened years ago.
Right. And the treatment for this type involves minimizing exposure, identifying the specific toxins, and supporting detoxification.
Okay, so that makes sense. What's next?
Type 4 is vascular, and this is all about the effects of cardiovascular impairment.
So heart health is connected to brain health.
Absolutely. If your heart isn't working properly, it can lead to problems with blood flow to the brain.
And that can damage brain tissue.
Exactly. And then finally we have type 5, which is trauma.
Trauma, like a head injury.
Right. The chapter emphasizes that any brain injury, even one that happened a long time ago, can increase the risk of dementia later in life.
So even those concussions you got playing football in high school could come back to haunt you.
It's possible, yeah. And it's not just concussions. Any kind of trauma, falls, car accidents, anything that impacts the brain can have long-term consequences.
Wow, that's pretty sobering.
It is. But the good news is that Dr. Bredesen's team has identified at least 36 direct causes of memory loss that could be tested for and countered. And they're all listed in figure 16.1 in the book if you want to check it out.
I'm definitely going to take a look at that. But it sounds like there's a lot that can go wrong.
There is. But the key is to catch it early. That's why testing is so important.
Okay, so how do you figure out which of these 6 types you might have?
Through laboratory tests. Dr. Bredesen's protocol involves a whole battery of tests to figure out what's going on at a biological level.
And once you know what's going on, then what?
Then you can start targeted treatment. And the chapter gives some examples, like if you have insulin resistance, which you can test for with a hemoglobin A1C blood test.
Hemoglobin A1C, that's the one that shows your average blood sugar over a few months, right?
Right. So if that test shows you have insulin resistance, you can work on improving it through nutrition and supplements.
So changing your diet can actually make a difference.
It can.
Mm-hmm.
And the chapter also talks about hormone levels. You can test those in your blood or saliva. And if your levels are low, you might benefit from hormone replacement therapy.
Okay. And what about homocysteine? I remember that from the last chapter.
Yeah, high homocysteine can be a problem. You can get that checked with a blood test too. And if it's high, you can often correct it with a B-complex vitamin.
So it's all about figuring out what's out of whack and then bringing it back into balance.
Exactly. And the earlier you do that, the better.
Right. Catch it early before too much damage is done.
Exactly. And the chapter really emphasizes that you need to work with a healthcare professional for this. This isn't something you can just DIY.
So you need someone to help you interpret the tests and figure out the right treatment plan.
Absolutely. And the Bredesen Protocol, this recode protocol that the chapter talks about, it involves a lot of different things.
Like what?
Well, it starts with a really thorough assessment. Your medical history, a bunch of tests, maybe even an MRI of your brain to see how big it is.
An MRI, so you can actually see if your brain is shrinking.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what they can do these days. And then once they have all that information, they can start working on optimizing your metabolism.
What does that mean?
Improving insulin resistance, making sure you're getting enough nutrients, balancing your hormones, reducing inflammation, all that good stuff.
And the chapter mentions the ketogenic diet. Is that part of the protocol?
It is. The Bredesen Protocol uses a plant-based ketogenic diet, which is basically low-carb, moderate protein, and high in healthy fats.
And that helps with all those things you just mentioned. Insulin resistance, inflammation, and so on.
It does. And it also encourages your body to use fat for fuel instead of glucose, which can be really beneficial for the brain.
Interesting. So it's not just about medication, it's about making these lifestyle changes too.
Exactly. And the chapter talks about this whole idea of lifestyle as medicine. It's a big part of the Bredesen Protocol.
So what kind of lifestyle changes are we talking about?
Well, besides the ketogenic diet, there's also personalized supplementation based on your test results, optimizing your hormones, getting regular exercise about 30 to 60 minutes, 5 or 6 times a week, getting enough sleep, managing your stress, and doing brain training exercises.
Wow, that's a lot, but it sounds like it's really worth it if it can help reverse dementia.
It is. And
Yeah.
the chapter doesn't stop there. It goes on to talk about some other emerging therapies that are showing promise.
Oh, like what?
Well, one of them is called pulsed electromagnetic fields, or
Mhm.
PEMF. And these are basically devices that emit electromagnetic waves. They come in a wide range of power, from low-power ones you can use at home to much stronger ones that are used in medical settings.
And what do these PEMF devices do?
They can help with a lot of things, including sleep, pain relief, and even brain function. There's actually a ton of research on them, something like 500 studies. And the chapter mentions this book, Power Tools for Healing, by Dr. William Pollock, that summarizes a lot of that research.
I might have to check that out. What else?
Well, there's also light therapy, or photobiomodulation. And this one is all about using light to stimulate healing and growth.
Light, like shining a light on your head.
It's a little more sophisticated than that, but yeah, basically. They use different wavelengths of light to target specific areas and stimulate different processes.
And this has been shown to be effective.
Yeah, there have been over 200 clinical trials showing benefits for everything from wound healing to cognitive enhancement. The chapter even mentions specific devices like Violite and Bales Photonics that have good reports. And if you want to learn more about this, Ben Greenfield's book, Boundless, goes into more detail.
Okay, I'll add that to my reading list. Anything else?
Yeah, there's hyperbaric oxygen therapy, or HBOT, and this one has been around for a while. They actually used it to treat Navy divers with decompression sickness.
Oh, wow. So what does it involve?
Basically, you sit in this pressurized chamber and breathe pure oxygen.
And that helps with brain function.
It can. There's actually a lot of research on HBOT, over 600 clinical trials, showing benefits for all sorts of conditions, including neurological disorders. And the chapter mentions Dr. Paul Harch, who's been using HBOT to treat 18 different neurological disorders at Louisiana State University School of Medicine. He even wrote a book about it called The Oxygen Revolution.
Wow, 18 different disorders. That's impressive.
It is, and the chapter even mentions Joe Namath, the football player, who used HBOT to help heal the effects of concussions.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that. I think there are even videos of him talking about it on YouTube.
There are. So yeah, HBOT is definitely something to look into if you're dealing with cognitive issues. And there's some other therapies that the chapter mentions too. Things like walking, yoga, Qigong, Tai Chi, acupuncture.
So basically, there are a lot of different ways to approach this.
There are. And the chapter also mentions a couple of other books that might be helpful. The Concussion Repair Manual by Dr. Dan Engel and Why Isn't My Brain Working by Dr. Demis Karazian.
Great, I'll make a note of those. So we've talked about all these different treatments, but what about diagnosis? How do you know what's going on in the first place?
That's where brain imaging comes in. And the chapter talks about how this field is rapidly advancing. We can now assess brain function in real time, which is pretty incredible.
So it's not just about taking a picture of your brain, it's about seeing how it's working.
Exactly. And there are all sorts of different imaging techniques that they're using now. Functional MRI, or fMRI, which is like a regular MRI, but it shows brain activity in real time.
That's amazing. What else?
Well, there's Loretta software, which is used with quantitative EEG, or KEEG. EEG is a way to measure the electrical activity in your brain, and KEEG takes that data and analyzes it to look for subtle patterns.
And there's MEGD, too.
Right. MEG stands for magnetoencephalography, and it measures the magnetic fields produced by electrical activity in the brain.
So a lot of different ways to peek inside the brain.
There are. And then there are PT scans, which measure glucose used in the brain. The idea is that more active areas of the brain will use more glucose.
But that makes sense.
And SPECT scans, which show blood flow in the brain. And then there's spectroscopy, which is still experimental, but can be used to measure levels of specific nutrients in the brain.
Wow, so many options. It's amazing how far we've come.
It is. And the chapter emphasizes that the rise in dementia is driving a lot of this innovation. We're seeing all these new tools and techniques being developed because there's such a need.
And the chapter ends on a really hopeful note. It basically says that real improvement in dementia is possible, especially with early intervention.
Yeah, it really emphasizes the importance of taking action. Don't just sit around and wait for things to get worse. Get tested, get treated, and make those lifestyle changes.
Absolutely. And the chapter provides some resources for people who want to learn more. There's the website for the Bredesen Protocol, which is www.apollohealthco.com. And then there's the author's website, which is www.healthwritersgroup.com. And of course, there are Dr. Bredesen's books, The End of Alzheimer's, The End of Alzheimer's Program, and The First Survivors of Alzheimer's.
All great resources. And this whole chapter, chapter 16 of the 21st Century Man, it's just packed with information.
It is. I highly recommend everyone check it out. It's a game changer.
Agreed.
Well, that was quite a deep dive. And next time we're tackling chapter 17, why you should care about your weight. Sounds intriguing.
Definitely. Looking forward to it.
Until then, everyone, take care and stay sharp.
See you next time.